Hi folks, Chris again, and hopefully our stream will be working. It should connect in about 30 seconds, so good evening to everybody who's watching on the stream. A word before we go on air, which I do by pushing that button. This is a weekly transmission of sundry material related to science, technology and history, mostly to radio history or communications history, designed to provide material for an amateur radio discussion to ensue afterwards, with some basis for discussion, some material that people can chew over to talk about eventually. I'll just check that my stream's going out. Looks like it is. And unlike last week, it seems to be going okay. No drop frames so far. We are surprised. Apologies for the lack of last week's session, but it was a case of every 10 minutes the internet was not just going slow, it was actually switching off to the point where we had no dial tone on our modem-derived telephone, our landline. And there's somebody there, so we'll go to air. Hello, this is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the usual Saturday night session. This evening I think we're without our usual audio peak limiter, so I'm going to have to watch levels very carefully. Hope everybody's okay in the lockdown. This test transmission, to give it its official title, goes out every Saturday night, 9:30 p.m. on 147.475 on 2 meters NBFM, and is transmitted from VK3AML in Burwood East. A varied program material tonight prior to opening up for live communications at 11 p.m. as we normally do, after 90 minutes worth of mixed material being put over. Interesting, this week I've been investigating DRM HF digital broadcasting on digital means, Digital Radio Mondiale. There are quite a few web-based software-defined receivers that you can dial up on internet now that have a DRM button, although the program material is fairly limited for English-speaking peoples. There is a BBC transmission that's receivable in Europe on about 3.9 megs, somewhere around 3.9 megs. There's also a French transmission in Europe on 3.9 megs, but not 24 hours. It's only a limited period of service. Radio New Zealand transmits DRM, but only on a very limited basis, it would appear, on the 6 and 9 meg broadcast bands, 31 metres and 39 metres, I suppose it would be. Or is it 41 metres? I think it's 41. And the Radio New Zealand transmission, unfortunately, goes out on those two frequencies at a Melbourne time of 3 to 7 a.m. And I actually did get up early enough to try and receive it on the web-based SDR at Tarlee in South Australia this week. But I can only describe the service, at least from South Australia, as highly intermittent. It's not the best time of the day for propagation to Australia on 9 megs at that time in the morning, and I suspect that the transmission is intended for receipt by people in the Pacific Ocean several hours ahead of us as a breakfast session. But only a limited service, not 24 hours. So that's DRM broadcasting. It does still exist, but in a kind of a limited way, and you can receive it on some web SDRs. In Australia, the VK5ARG Kiwi SDR gets the Chinese DRM services quite well. And the Chinese have probably been the most active in digital broadcasting on HF radio. There's quite a few frequencies involved, and there is some DRM somewhere on the band all day as far as China goes, but not in the English language. Quality is reasonably good. I've heard very variable quality from these DRM stations. Some of them sound distinctly lacking in treble and overdoing the bass, as if they've got tilted frequency response or something. BBC's not bad, but unlike the old days of analogue broadcasting, the distortions that you can get on digital Radio Mondiale are very variable. Some people's voices distort more than others. Some program material distorts more than others. Music tends to come over fairly well. Sometimes types of speech turn somebody with a perfectly good speaking voice into somebody who sounds like they have a lisp. L-I-S-P. But anyway, well worth a try if you're interested in such things, but I get the impression that it needs at least a strength 8 signal and a constant strength 8 to get through on digital Radio Mondiale, whereas analogue broadcasting can be received on AM even at a much lower signal strength than that and still be passable. So whether it's an improvement is all a matter of, I suppose, what sort of a signal you've got and where you are. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission. I'll just check that my stream is still going out okay, and so far, we've got quite a few people watching in. Pirate, whoever you are. Tilly Gmail, I think that's my friend in Lilydale. Dennis, the avid YouTube watcher, VK1DKO in Canberra, is watching. Given what's happening across Southeast Asia with about 2 billion people, we should not have closed our shortwave services in Shepparton. Well, unfortunately, that was largely the doing of the previous head of the ABC, Michelle, and I think a lot of people disagreed with what she was doing, but now it's done. There's no use turning back. I think even the real estate has been converted for sale that used to be occupied by Radio Australia. Hello, VK3MSG, Grant. Nice to see you there. I should mention for the people listening on 147.475, we stream this as video on YouTube Live at the same time as we're transmitting on 147.475, and you'll find me if you Google the phrase VK3AML 28 August 2021. That's VK3AML 28 August 2021. And hello also to Terry Sims, who I see's messaging us on the stream. And so far the stream's behaving itself fairly well. We've had 50 missed frames, which is about 2 seconds in the last 8 minutes, so that's not too bad going. As long as it keeps that up, I'll be very happy. One series of videos that I came across this week, and as they're commercial, I think they'll have no worry about me reusing their material, giving them a slightly broader listenership. It's produced by an organisation calling themselves the Microphone University. They're based in Denmark. They've been producers of the DPA Delta Papa Alpha microphones for the last 60 years, so they're a long-established company, not unlike AKG, who produced this microphone I'm speaking through, or perhaps even Neumann. And they have a series of videos on the importance of speech articulation, which of course relates very closely to amateur radio. The articulation of speech, the ability to hear speech clearly, particularly in the presence of background noise, is one of the, or should be one of the greatest concerns of amateur radio operators. So without any further ado, I'll go over to the people at DPA Microphones, the microphone university in Denmark, talking about the importance of speech articulation and the usage of correct microphone technique.
The voice is a very complex instrument and it produces audio from below 100 Hz to above 10 kHz. But not all frequencies are equally important for the speech intelligibility. In this tutorial, I will cover the mismatch between the most important frequencies and the loudest frequencies. Speech consists of both vowel and consonant sounds. You could say that in the spoken voice, the vowels a, I, u are the low and mids, and the consonants ts, s, k are the higher frequencies. The vowel sounds, the low frequencies, are much louder than the consonants. If we make a recording of the word act, it would look like this. You would see that the level of the vowel a is much higher than the level of the k and the t. The consonants are extremely important for the speech intelligibility, so the mismatch between the loud vowels and the fine details in the consonants is a huge problem. If we look at the frequencies in relation to the level of speech, we can see that most of the overall energy of the speech is produced in the lower mid-range of the voice spectrum around 250 Hz. This is where the vowels are predominant. The consonants, the k and the t from the example before, are predominant several octaves higher in the area between 2 to 4 kHz at a much lower level. So you see, there's a high demand of accuracy in the entire audio chain to secure that all frequencies are captured. So, if your microphone doesn't capture all frequencies or doesn't reproduce them equally, the natural sound of the voice is jeopardized. I will give you an example. Here I have removed the 2 kHz area with an EQ. You should be able to hear that the speech intelligibility of my voice is reduced dramatically. And in this example, the EQ is now back to flat and the speech should sound normal again. The reason for this is that this 2 to 4 kHz area is where the consonants in non-tonal language are predominant. And without these consonants, the intelligibility is reduced. So you see from this graphics the importance of the different frequencies. The area around 2 to 4 kHz has the highest importance. If you look at the two graphs side by side, you see that there is a mismatch between the energy of the sound versus the importance of the sound. So the conclusion is, to secure full speech intelligibility, you have to make sure you don't let the energy of the vowels mask, cover, or drown the fine details of the consonants. Preserve all frequencies, lows, mids, and highs. If you ever had problems understanding what's being said in a large reverberant room like a cathedral, or perhaps in a packed classroom with a loud background noise, then you know what it sounds like when the consonants are drowned. In this tutorial, I will explain why speech intelligibility goes down when the consonants drown. Speech consists of both vowel and consonant sounds. The vowels a, I, u are all generated by the vocal cords in our throat and filtered by the vocal cavities. The consonants are T, S, P, K, B, pretty much all the hard sounds. They are all created by air blockages and noise sounds, all formed in the passages of air through the throat and mouth, particularly the tongue and lips. When the vowels are identical, the consonants before or after the vowel makes the differentiations of the words. The vowel or doesn't mean anything, but if I add the P, it becomes paw, or the L, it becomes law, and then it makes sense. Like the words top, bob, pop, they are identical without the consonants. So, the consonants are extremely important for speech intelligibility. Without the consonants, we are not able to understand what's being said or sung. Even though the consonants are hard-sounding, they have very little energy compared to the vowels. It is impossible to add energy to the consonants. Try to yell the sound of a T. It's not louder, even though you are yelling it. This basically means that when you yell, the consonants are masked by the vowels. And you're not making it easier to understand what you just said. Consonants are predominantly found in the frequency range above 500 Hz, but most of them are in the area between 2 to 4 kHz. So this part of the frequency range is therefore one of the most important areas to preserve when focusing on speech intelligibility. Reflections, background noise, or music can easily mask or bury the consonants. Listen to this word. Missing. You can't really tell what is being said, but if I remove the reverb so you can hear it without the reflections, you will understand it. Missed. If the background sound or the reflections are too loud, it can often be solved just by moving the microphone closer to the mouth or by changing to a mic with a more directional characteristic. So the takeaway from this tutorial should be that in order to maintain the high speech intelligibility, you have to preserve the consonants. And in order to preserve the consonants, there are 3 easy steps. Choose microphones with a wide frequency range, place it close to the sound source, avoid as many reflections and as much background noise as possible. Why is it that we have to have eye contact when we are talking to someone? Does it really add to the speech intelligibility? Well, you can sense the mood and more of the meaning of the conversation if you have eye contact, but the acoustics of the voice is also a very important factor. The level of the speech is much higher in front of a person, but the intelligibility is also much higher. This is due to the content of the frequencies in front of the person talking as opposed to behind the person. In this diagram, we see the blue line representing the high frequencies and the red line representing the lows. The green line are the mids. High frequencies are only radiated in front of the person. And these high frequencies add to the speech intelligibility, and without them, we compromise the meaning of the message. If we look at the vertical plane, we will also see a difference in the frequencies. There is a higher representation of the high mids in the 2 to 4 kHz area above the head. And this is very important to know, as this is where all the consonants are. In the following, we will hear the differences between the positions on a female singer. We use a common reference at 1 meter as our normal, because 1 meter is the normal distance for a conversation between 2 people. So compared to the reference 1 meter away, a placement on the forehead is close to identical. The forehead position sounds like this.
I used to feel so uninspired.
If we move the microphone backwards to the position just in front of the ear, we see that we then lose a lot of the high frequencies. It sounds like this.
I used to feel so uninspired.
Next position is the headset position. It's not as far behind the mouth as the ear position, so the high mids in the 2 to 3 kHz range are not as attenuated as before.
I used to feel so uninspired.
There's a bit more of the mid-range where the consonants are predominant, so there are many good reasons to use the headset position, but it is still lacking a bit of the speech intelligibility compared to the forehead position. The next position is the typical lavalier position on the chest, which introduces a few challenges. One challenge is that the level of the direct sound of the voice is much lower than on the headset position, and we therefore pick up much more background noise. And frequency-wise, we lose not only the high frequencies, but much more in the mid-range, again compromising the speech intelligibility.
I used to feel so uninspired.
And again, hear all 4 positions without me interrupting in between.
I used to feel so uninspired. I used to feel so uninspired. I used to feel so uninspired. I used to feel so uninspired.
So, in order to preserve the natural sound of the voice when you are forced to place the microphone in a less than optimal position, like on the chest, you have to compensate with an EQ. You can use these basic graphs for inspiration to compensation. But this will only work for you if you are working with a microphone with a frequency response you already know. If you don't know the frequency response of the microphone you're working with and you follow these common rules, there is a huge risk that you're doing more damage than good for the sound. Microphones with a high degree of consistency might be a little more expensive, but it pays off tenfold in post-production.
From DPA Microphone University, Denmark, one of the producers of high-quality microphones. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, and that very interesting tutorial pointed out that frequency response is highly, and I mean highly, dependent on microphone placement. You can't regard a microphone as being a transducer which has the same frequency response irrespective of where it's placed. And therefore equalization depends on microphone placement as much as it does on the microphone's intrinsic frequency response. And that's something that a lot of people don't really get. Ultimately, you have to equalize audio according to the mic placement and the voice characteristics of the sound source. I've noticed using a waterfall display, frequency on one axis, time on the second axis, and the brightness of the display giving the intensity of the sound at that particular frequency, that my own voice has a peak at about 150 hertz. Fundamentals extend down to 50 hertz if I really drop my voice. And the frictives and the sibilants, the S's, the T's, the D's, all go up to 10, 20 kilohertz. Next week, I'll be talking about extended bandwidth sideband, which actually is practiced in America to a reasonable extent. And there, the trick, if it can be called a trick, is to use equalization to make every octave of your voice the same amplitude as every other octave that you transmit, because usually you're transmitting against a fairly heavy noise background. Now, to illustrate this, I think I have it here. The noise background, most people assume that you've got a white noise background, which sounds like this. Okay, you'll hear that it's just general noise that occupies the whole audio spectrum, and it's fairly constant. But, for example, on 80 meters, it's not just white noise. It's actually varying a lot, and to show you what I mean, I recorded a bit of just band noise, background noise with no signal, on the VK3AML Kiwi SDR, set to 6 kilohertz bandwidth. And listen to the way the noise level is very rapidly running up and down. Here we go. Compare that with white noise again. Now, the thing that the band noise gives you problems with is that its rapidly shooting up and down with all of the static crashes in the order of 20 or 30 dB. And the signal that you receive on HF radio, because it's usually fading, can be, even if it's moderate fade, it may fade 10 dB. Be a lot more than that if it's fading severely. So you've got a 10 dB HF signal fade against a noise level that's shooting up and down by 20 dB. And I had a very interesting talk with Nigel Holmes about this, VK3DZ, who was a programmer for the frequencies of Radio Australia until it closed. And Nigel pointed out that on HF you won't notice any change in power unless the change is in the order of 10 to 1 in power. In other words, from 100 watts to a kilowatt, or from 10 watts to 100. It's because the fade of 10 or 20 dB combined with the noise level shooting up and down 10 or 20 dB means that a small change won't be noticed. And here I've had huge arguments with people who have been in favour of pushing all amateur permits up to a kilowatt from the present legal limit of 400 watts PEP. And I point out that's only 4 dB. Are you going to notice that against a noise level that's varying 20 dB and a signal that's varying 10 to 20? I think the answer's no. Now, people will swear black and blue they get through much better on a kilowatt than they do on 400 watts. But I think, having listened to actual examples of it, and having spoken to Nigel Holmes at length about it, who has professional HF broadcasting experience, that a lot of the insistence of amateurs on a kilowatt is based on what you might call confirmation bias. It's what they want to believe about the power change. Now, you might notice a difference locally in that power change if you're listening against virtually no noise as a monitor off air, or if you're listening against a white noise background. But the point is, band noise is not just white noise. It's varying. It consists of static crashes, and it is varying. So unless you've got a pretty solid change in the transmitted signal, you won't hear much bloody difference. I'm expecting a few people will expect that one of the pirates on the list has just said maybe we should get 5 kilowatts. Well, you can, but you can get it by going for a broadcast license. And I believe that these days, if you want a broadcast license for HF radio, according to people I've spoken to, it's about $400 a year. It's not huge. And the ACMA just can't give the broadcast frequencies away because nobody's listening there anymore, or very few people are. And there are frequencies that are begging for usage. I think that's why we're getting slowly more amateur bands on HF and fewer on VHF and UHF. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima standing on his soapbox, I suppose, but I hope I've given adequate reason there. Again, the difference between white noise and 80 metre band noise, very variable in comparison. So there you go. That's one point that I really wanted to make tonight. Before we go on to the historical material, I suppose we might leap into the historical material anyway. That early film of Hallicrafters that I was hoping to transmit last week, I'll try and open that up for you now. This was a film made in 1943, I think. Hallicrafters talking about switching from their peacetime role of producing transmitting and receiving equipment for ham radio to producing equipment for the services. So let's go back to 1942, and this is Hallicrafters' own version of their own activities during World War II.
Second salvo, 200 yards short. Third salvo, on target.
Hallicrafters presents Voice of Victory, produced by the Jam Handy organisation and presented by the Hallicrafters Company. I've blocked the opening music there. Technical Advisor Cyrus T. Reed, W9AA. Grateful acknowledgement is made to the members of the Signal Corps United States Army, whose splendid cooperation made possible both the design and production of the SCR-299 and this picture of its operation.
Long before Pearl Harbor, the Signal Corps of the United States Army knew it would take more than a telephone wire to connect this voice with all the other fighting units that had to hear it. They knew it would take radio transmission. Radio can reach these tanks wherever they are and tell them what's ahead. A radio transmitter could coordinate the movement of troops, bring tanks and infantry together at the right place at the right time. But it would have to be a mobile radio transmitter. And it would have to be a powerful transmitter to keep an unbroken contact between our forces on the ground, in the air, and on the sea. The control of widely separated forces, the timing of their action, the success of the attack depends upon reliable radio communication. Yes, the Signal Corps engineers knew just what kind of a transmitter it would take to do the job. But the big problem was to locate a manufactured transmitter of a design that would come close to these requirements. In this pre-war Hallicrafters HT4 transmitter, the Signal Corps found many of the answers. It was designed especially for amateur use. It was easily capable of worldwide communication using either code or voice. Another great advantage was the fact that this Hallicrafters unit had been on the market for several years. There was an opportunity to check its performance through the records of hundreds of America's hams. And these amateurs know good performance. It employed band switching in the exciter and driver stages, which made it possible to change frequencies very rapidly.
Say W2 USA, W4 GWG calling 20. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt. 4G George, repeating me now, W2 USA. The center of the traffic is hello 20, hello 20, back to you. You stand by because I'm out in the control room making a station break. I wonder if you're still receiving the station. One of each mile, calling 20, hello 20, calling any 20, calling any 20, calling sure that you're hearing me. But I would like to...
Hello, CQ. Hello, CQ. This is W9WZE Chicago, W9WZE Chicago, calling CQ for any 20-meter phone and standing by. Go ahead, please.
Hello, W9WZE Chicago. Hello, W9WZE Chicago. This is W6QD, Los Angeles, California. W6QD, Los Angeles. calling W9WZE Chicago. Go ahead, Bill.
Hello, W6QD, Los Angeles, California. This is W9WZE Chicago coming back. Good evening, Herb. Your signals are coming in fine tonight. R5S9. By the way, Herb, what are you doing on 20-meter phone? I thought you always worked CW. Now let's hear something about that marvelous California weather, eh?
Alaska, Australia, Europe, South Africa. These were regular, almost daily experiences in many amateurs' homes, where Hallicrafters were rapidly shrinking this old world of ours. The transmitter that serves the Army must be able to perform anywhere and under all kinds of unpredictable conditions. Up to this time, no one had ever thought seriously of putting this sensitive, finely balanced instrument on wheels and bouncing it around foxholes. What about vibration? Where would the power come from? The job of toughening up the HT-4 to go to war fell on the shoulders of Bill Halligan, Bob Samuelson, Hallicrafters' chief engineer, and the hard-pressed technicians of the Signal Corps. There were few changes needed to adapt this unit to Army needs. There was good engineering and good sound construction in the set to start with. This was to be the new home for Hallicrafters equipment. Everything needed to transmit and receive had to be packed into this small space. That would take some more good engineering. This demand was nothing new to these pioneers. There are no fixed limits in Hallicrafters' design or construction. There is always development, change, improvement. Many of the war adaptations were drawn from advanced developments that had been in the experimental stage for months. For example, in the pre-war model, plugging in a tuning unit might be quite a trick if the holes in the prongs couldn't get together. For the new Signal Corps transmitter, guide channels made this tuning unit change quick, positive, and held the unit securely in place. In the pre-war model, the prongs on the tube were enough to hold it in place. But this won't do for hopping shell holes. A tube support or ring was added to lock the tube firmly in position so that no amount of bumping or vibration would move it. For stationary use, no special footing was needed to anchor the transmitter. But for rough riding in a truck, rubber shock-proof mountings were added. In the process of making the entire unit more rugged, this air padder was replaced by a new vacuum tube padding condenser. Rooftop antennas could be as large as the pre-war ham wanted to make them, but it was pretty obvious that a rigging such as this one would hardly do on the top of a Signal Corps truck. The solution was in the use of whip antennas and in designing an antenna tuning unit which would efficiently transfer the output of the transmitter to the whip antenna. Throughout all of these changes, to adapt a peacetime transmitter to wartime requirements, the high-quality standards of Hallicrafters were strictly maintained in workmanship, in design and construction, and especially in performance. When the Signal Corps inspected the first of Hallicrafters' transmitters armored for war, they found what they were looking for: a high-powered unit that had been made completely mobile, one that delivered good, reliable performance under all conditions. The first big job had been done well. Then came the warning of another bigger job. Field reports indicate performance of SCR 299 exceeds expectation. Request you expedite production as much as possible. And in working man's English, that means Let's go on production. This is the plant in Clearing, Illinois, where mass production of the new SCR 299 mobile radio station was obtained on a scale never dreamed of before in this industry. The key men for this tremendous production job were selected from the ranks of the American radio amateurs. These men had the know-how, the technical background and experience it took to get into action fast. This entire operation is headed by Herb Hartley, known to the amateur fraternity as W9WNG. This production was accomplished through the splendid cooperation of hundreds of loyal, skilled workers who realized how big the job ahead was and knew how to do it. It was achieved through the unfailing efforts of many suppliers and their thousands of workers who built the tubes, the transformers, the condensers, coils, insulators, the steel chassis, and all the other components that go in to make the SCR 299. And finally, the very design and construction of the transmitter lent itself to mass production better than any other pre-war domestic transmitter. The chassis was strong. There was room to work with sub-assemblies. This is the main assembly line, from the end of which come the completed transmitters. This is the feeder table for the main assembly line. Here, the sub-assemblies are inspected or hooked up to other components. At the foot of the main assembly line, the transmitter looks like this: a steel base to which are added sockets for rectifier tubes. Then the bleeder resistor, which furnishes a constant load on the high voltage supply. Next, the filter choke and condensers, which supply direct current to the plate circuits of the transmitter. In wiring these parts, a great deal of time and work is saved by the use of pre-formed cables. The cables are cut, formed, and tipped, all ready for installation. And here's the base assembly, completed in just a little more time than it's taken to show it. Meanwhile, on the opposite side of the table, the power control panel is being assembled. These are the controls for filament voltage and modulator bias. The purpose of this panel is to group, within convenient reach of the operator, all the essential power controls. These cables here are cut to length and form over on the feeder table. Terminal lugs are soldered to the ends. Then all the other wires needed in the circuit are placed into position, bound together, so that soldering to terminals is the only operation needed in the final assembly. This is the power panel cable. When wiring is completed and the switches and fuses have been installed, the sides are joined to the power control panel, and this unit is ready to join the main assembly line. The transmitter begins to take shape as the base is joined to the power panel unit. Electric hoists are used for ease and accuracy in handling these parts. Now the main power transformer is set in place. This is the unit that steps up the input to the high voltage required to operate the final amplifier and modulator tubes. After the transformer is connected, the entire deck or base is hoisted to a dolly to make handling easier. There's high power equipment on this deck, and it's heavy. The second deck contains the audio driver stage and modulator of the transmitter, which makes possible radio telephone operation. This entire unit, built in another plant, has been inspected on the feeder table and requires only a modulation transformer and the phone CW relay to be complete. The top deck of the transmitter, the radio frequency section, begins with the installation of the exciter assembly, which is fabricated at Hallicrafters' 26th Street plant. 3 separate tuning units may be plugged into this assembly, any one of which may be selected by the band switch. The panel is joined to the frame so that shafts and controls can be properly placed. This is the extension shaft to the band switch. By the use of this band switch connected to the exciter and driver stages, it's possible to change frequencies very rapidly. That's vitally important in military operation. The final amplifier tuning condenser assembly was built as a unit on the feeder table. It is placed carefully in position. Before this radio frequency deck joins the main assembly line, the standoffs are added. The exciter to modulator cable is hooked up. The neutralizing condenser is mounted on the standoffs. The main tube socket is added. Here are the antenna binding posts through which passes the output of the transmitter. This unit is now carefully inspected before it moves into main assembly. Every element, no matter how large or small, is inspected and tested before it goes into a transmitter. When the radio frequency deck joins the main assembly here, the big job is nearly done. A steady flow of finished units has been made possible by intelligent planning of the work at all Hallicrafters plants, perfect coordination with the suppliers and subcontractors, and hundreds of skilled and tireless hands. Now the relays are covered. The smaller tubes are set in place, and the completed unit is ready to leave the assembly line. The transmitter is now ready for the first of many tests it will receive before it earns the stamp of final approval. This is the electrical testing room, where the transmitter's output, modulation, and keying are accurately measured and recorded. This work calls for plenty of technical skill and knowledge, so the staff here is principally made up of experienced radio amateurs. Signal Corps inspectors watch closely these important steps in controlling both the quality and performance of the transmitter. This test measures the radio frequency output of the transmitter. Instead of allowing the signal to radiate over an antenna, these bulbs, called the dummy antenna, convert the RF output into heat. Another important test is the one made for overload. The purpose of this is to make sure the relays respond properly to protect the circuits. This is also done to determine the capacity of the entire transmitter to absorb a temporary overload in normal operation without breaking down. Next, the transmitter is given a trial at sending code signals. When operated in this manner, the audio amplifier and modulator are not used. The flashing of these rectifier tubes shows how the key simply makes and breaks the output to form the characters of the telegraph code. To check how well the transmitter responds to all essential voice frequencies, the oscillograph is used. This detects any distortion.
And this is VK3AML transmitting a documentary on Hallicrafters. The audio I'm putting over 147.475. If you want to watch the video, try Googling VK3AML 28 August 2021, and that should take you to our live stream, which we're streaming at the moment. That's Google the phrase VK3AML 28 August 2021. You should find us. Back to the Hallicrafters documentary, and that's not a sine wave we're looking at there. Ooh.
And locates at what point the distortion occurs. This transmitter shows a normal frequency response. When the lid goes on the transmitter, that means it has passed all the electrical tests with an A1 rating. It's ready now for the Signal Corps truck. In another part of the plant, radio receivers are being mounted on a table assembly that makes up the listening end of this communication unit. Each table is equipped with two similar radio receivers. One operates on the main power supply and the other from an auxiliary battery. The entire assembly is tested for proper operation as a unit. The two receivers can be operated simultaneously. This is the speech amplifier. Two separate operating positions are provided. Part of the table assembly includes two loudspeakers, two field telephone instruments, and a portable typewriter. This is the final step in assembly, bringing the transmitter, the receivers, and the accessories together and installing them in the truck. Once the equipment is mounted inside this door, it becomes officially the SCR-299. It's on the way to the front. Easy does it. There's no room to spare here, and there's plenty more to be put in. Every inch of space is accounted for in this truck, and these men know how to use it. A place for everything, and everything goes right into place quickly and securely. While the transmitter is being bolted to the floor, the table assembly with its receiving equipment moves in. Accuracy in design and construction makes it possible to save many valuable hours throughout the entire production and assembly of the unit. There goes the wall cabinet that holds the additional operating parts, extra coils, tuning units, condensers. And here's the bench that contains the tools and spare parts, a radio man's hope chest. And this is what it looks like when the operators step in. At the far end, the transmitter with the antenna tuner on top of it. On the right, the wall cabinet. On the floor, the long bench for the operators. Both of these are storehouses for parts and accessories. On the left wall of the truck, the operator's table with two receivers, speech amplifier, control panel, and below, an electric heater and the two field telephones. There goes the SCR-299 out into the field to make its final test on the air. There's just one thing missing. Where's the power coming from? The Signal Corps provides for that in a portable gasoline-driven generator that rides in this trailer behind each truck.
Isn't it nice to know that something of that size is considered portable? This is 1942. VK3 Alpha Mike Lima testing.
This generator supplies standard lighting current, 117 volts AC. A transmitter and receiver that operate on this current can be hooked in to power almost anywhere. Here is the mobile power supply. A remote control from the truck to the generator makes it possible to start and stop the generator at will. The operator prepares for the air test. His first call is to Central Control Station.
WXYK, WXYK4, calling for a check on the quality of this transmission and standing by.
And here is communication going off to war. Over these ramps roll hundreds of units that will carry the voice of victory to every corner of the earth. Like the champion thoroughbred it is, the SCR-299 rates a whole boxcar to itself. This signal corps unit is built for action and to get into action fast. It's a highly mobile radio station and may be set up almost anywhere in battle or invasion activities. Speed is vital. Every minute counts. The enemy doesn't wait. Communications must be ready at all times. It may be the only contact over which a blow-by-blow report flashes from the local front to the remote commands at Cairo, London, Sydney. The SCR-299 in this position is the nerve center of all our attacking forces. Artillery, tanks, infantry, Air Force, many of which are widely separated. Through the transmitter flow the reports, information, timing, and the order to advance. This is the voice of victory. Contact may be made with an approaching flight of bombers while they're still hundreds of miles away from the target. To coordinate their attack perfectly, these flyers must know the present position of our own tanks, infantry, artillery. They get this information by contact with the message center, which speaks and listens through the SCR-299. Tanks moving into position must be kept informed of the approaching air support. Timing is vital, and the timing of all these movements is controlled through this voice by direct contact with the Armored Forces headquarters. From many small stations scattered miles apart along the battlefronts comes the flash news, the observations, the unexpected, all clearing through this central station. That's how radio helps to time these big movements, make them strike most effectively and with the minimum loss of American lives. Radio communication units are among the first pieces of equipment to go into action, whether the attack is on land or sea. Radio communications stay in the fight as long as there are men, guns, ships, and tanks on the move. For the life, death, or victory of all of them depend upon this command: get the message through. Perhaps one of the most important messages ever issued is the one you're about to hear from Major General Harry C. Ingalls, Chief Signal Officer of the United States Army. General Ingalls.
I'm speaking now as one American soldier to another, for we in the armed forces regard each of you men and women in this audience as being one of us and working shoulder to shoulder with us. You and you alone are responsible for the production and performance of this vital piece of communication equipment. You have seen enough to know what good communication equipment means to the men out there and what it means to victory. You have done a splendid job. Keep up the good work you have been doing. We are asking millions of American soldiers to stake their lives on breaking Germany and Japan. They ask you to keep up your production to the limit of your ability and the high standards of workmanship that have given us an advantage over the enemy that can be measured only on the day of final victory.
And that was a Hallicrafters documentary on their work producing radio material for the armed forces of America, particularly during World War II. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima with the regular Saturday night test transmission. And we move on now to the BBC. The BBC. In 1932, the BBC moved from their original studios at Savoy Hill by the London Embankment near the Savoy Hotel to an all-new, purpose-built, state-of-the-art broadcast house in Portland Place in London. And the director of drama programming there was the brother of Sir John Gielgud, the elder brother, Val Gielgud, who appears in the film you're about to see. Val Gielgud scripted a dramatic presentation called Death at Broadcasting House, which in 1934, 2 years into the usage of Broadcast House, was actually produced as a film. And that film has been remastered, very high standards of recent times. So I've extracted some vital parts of this to show exactly how they would put together a dramatic presentation at the BBC in 1934. Wound into this film, of course, is the story of a whodunit, a murder in Broadcasting House. One of the radio performers in one of the multiple studios used for mixing in those days gets done in, as you'll see. And the equipment being shown is actually the equipment that they used at Broadcasting House at the time. The monitor speakers, the Art Nouveau mixing panels, the multiple studio technique, the fact that they produced their sound effects live is all shown in this film. And the way the murder is detected is by the replay of audio by a device called a Blatnophone. Detection by Blatnophone. The Blatnophone was the very first magnetic recorder used by the BBC. It used a metre diameter reel of steel tape, 1/8 of an inch wide, stainless steel made in Sweden, and at 1.5 metres per second through the heads, it would give you half an hour of playing time with a bandwidth of about 5 kilohertz. Not too good by modern standards and very, very bulky. But you'll see all of that in this documentary presentation. It's actually a dramatic presentation made in 1934. Death at Broadcasting House. The chap with the rather stylish Van Dyke beard is Val Gielgud, director of BBC drama at the time. Let's go back 90 years. Oh dear.
Can we have that last sentence again, Mr. Parsons? Do remember you're being strangled. You're not apologizing for revoking at cards.
I was afraid of overdoing the scream.
You certainly didn't do that. It sounded like gargling. Now then, once more, and do let yourself go.
Is that you? Got the money? Who are you? Come out of the shadows. I can't see your face. You! Let me go! Let me go! I swear I'm innocent! You're strangling me!
Hold up a minute. Fade in, 7 Seal. Parsons, that's worse. Has no producer ever tried to strangle you?
Sorry, Mr. Caird. I suppose I just don't come over well on the microphone.
Oh, rubbish. Hold on, I'll come down and show you. 6A. I say, 6A. Afraid I shall have to hold you up. I'm going down to 7C. Sorry about all this delay, Joan.
That's all right, Julian.
I don't even get an apology. This broadcasting business is getting as bad as the films.
How I love these actors.
Caird seems pretty jumpy today. Does he? More like a circus manager than a BBC producer.
Well, what do you expect when you write this kind of stuff for production?
Well, that's charming of you. I didn't expect you to appreciate it.
You didn't write the music, did you?
No.
No, I thought not. That seems pretty good.
Oh, the way they keep us hanging about at these dramatic productions.
Never mind, Perry. One of these days you may get a chance to play.
Hello, Caird. Oh, hello.
Sorry you ever tried to produce Fleming's play now, aren't you?
Not at all. Why?
Oh, Fleming tells me you're a bit nervous about it.
I'm only nervous about some of the cast. And it's the last time I ever take your advice on that subject.
Now listen.
Oh, I've listened to you quite long enough already.
Yes, and I've still got some things I'd like to tell you.
You're probably listening to all we're saying.
You're always so right.
One ought to be gagged all the time in a building like this.
What I hate is not being able to see some of the actors you're giving cues to.
To me, that's the only thing that makes broadcasting at all possible.
Why the deuce aren't we getting those return lights?
It's only just time. Ah, here we are. stand by, see, Bill?
It isn't a sea, you fat idiot. It's a river.
This is the national program. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we present you a broadcast of a radio play entitled Murder Immaculate. This play has been specially written for broadcasting by Mr. Rodney Fleming, the author of 2 plays now running in the West End of London. The cast is as follows. The husband is played by Leopold Dryden, the wife by Joan Dryden, the guests by Walter Fotheringay and Emilia Dunn, and the wife's lover by Percy Rhodes. The victim, the man who is murdered, is played by Sidney Parsons, and the incidental music is by the Gershom Parkington Quintet. The play is produced by Julian Caird.
And I'll stop it there because I've just received a warning saying we've detected copyrighted audio and video in your stream, so I'll change the source material. A few dropped frames, no stress. Yes, I saw a brief reconnection. I'll just change my source. Hang on. There we go. No, I don't want to change my my source of video. I'll change it to some video that I took at what'll I do now? Let's go right back. Thomas Edison, popularly credited as being the inventor of electric light, the inventor of the phonograph, quite a few other inventions. By 1927 he was the grand old man of American manufacturing, and naturally when sound film was first invented he was one of the first people they went to for interviews. And in this interview from 1927, one of the first audio interviews ever conducted on film, he talks about how they came to devise the whole lighting system for Pearl Street in New York in 1878, shortly after he invented the carbon filament bulb, or at least the carbon filament bulb that could be commercialised. I think Joseph Swan in England was narrowly ahead of him, but not as practical. Thomas Edison on film, 1927, and I think there are a few clips here from 1929. Charming old chap. He actually cracks a few jokes during this too.
Before starting experiments on the incandescent electric light system, many memorandums were drawn up as to a general system that would permit of the subdivision of the lights into small units analogous to gas jets and with commercial economy superior to the prevailing gas system. The result was that if it was to be successful, all the units must be worked in multiple hours. This necessitated the creation of lamps of very high resistance to diminish the enormous investment in copper necessary if low resistance lamps were to be used. This necessitated a very fine hair-like filament of the resistance material. On October 21st, 1871, numerous experiments resulted in the production of a small unit lamp of comparatively enormous resistance. The filament being under conditions of great stability, after the result I knew the problem approached commercial solution. While these lamp experiments continued, other parts of the general system was actively experimented upon. The dynamo, as then in vogue, was extremely inefficient, the loss approaching 50%. due to some misunderstanding among electricians which I never comprehended. However, these experiments produced a dynamo of which 90% of the energy was useful. Then meters for measuring the current were used by thousands of customers, and also a host of accessories like underground conduits, switches, sockets, etc. were necessary to make a complete system of distribution, all of which was accomplished. After the installation of the first station in New York, other improvements were added, such as a 3-wire system, which reduced the copper conductor requirements more than 50%. After this, many central distributing stations were introduced. In the days I had a high opinion of the system, but I did not realize the stupendous electrical industry of today. Naturally, I am gratified to feel that I have been privileged to play a part in this vast achievement. I am proud of electrical industry, of its vision, courage, zeal, and devotion to the public service, and I suspect every American feels the same way about it. It is a great reward for me and my colleagues and co-workers, many of them still living, that we have survived to see the fruits of our labors. The record is wonderful, but fine as it is, it can be made still better, and I have a feeling that in your hands it will be.
And now Thomas Edison cracks a joke about Scottish thrift.
One of the best stories I heard recently of the great economy of the Scots was during the total eclipse of the sun about 3 years ago in a small town in Connecticut. When it became a total eclipse, the Scotsman rushed into the telegraph office and tried to send a night message. I firmly believe that the machine age will favorably affect the lives of the workers. It is impossible, however, to forecast what electricity and invention will make of the world 100 years hence. We don't know 1,000,000% about anything. All theories, sooner or later, are abandoned for others.
Here in this library, which has witnessed the long, arduous endeavor of a man to conquer and harness the forces of nature. Many days Mr. Edison has spent here without sleep or food as he wrestled with the problems of physics and chemistry. And to him has gone the wreath of victory which so many strive for, but few attain.
I should mention that this was one of the first lectures that was delivered from coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco at the start of 1929. This is VK3AML testing.
You, my friends of the National Electric Light Association, assembled in San Francisco, and to you, my friends of the World Power Conference assembled in Berlin. I rejoice in the wonderful advance that has been made in the art of electrical communication. You and I are very widely separated physically by a great distance in miles, but time and space have been annihilated for us, and our minds meet and speech is instantaneous. Thus I enjoy the pleasant privilege of saluting you in person, and have extended to each one of you a friendly and cordial greeting. I rejoice in the wonderful advance that has been made in the art of electrical communication. You and I are very widely separated physically by a great distance in miles, but time and space have been annihilated for us, and our minds meet and speech is instantaneous. Thus I enjoy the pleasant privilege of saluting you in person and have extended to each one of you a friendly and cordial greeting. The meetings you are now attending have a significant importance to a world which is ever looking for further advancement in its comforts and conveniences arising from improvements in the methods of generation and distribution of electricity for light, heat, and power. Your problem will be numerous, but I have no doubt of their successful solution. I have been deeply impressed in observing the magnificent proportions to which electrical development has attained. This wonderful culmination has been achieved through the labors of many men of many minds in the 50 years that has elapsed since the unprecedented but effectual foundation was laid for the broad system of electric, light, heat, and power. I thank you and hope that still greater successes may reward your labor.
Thank you, sir.
And now an interview between Henry Ford, Thomas Edison and Harvey Firestone, discussing the employment prospects immediately before the Wall Street crash, which came 1 week after this was recorded in early October 1929. The room in which this was recorded was somewhat reverberant, but you should be able to make it out if you listen carefully. I think Henry Ford is the first to speak.
I see, yes, that's the idea.
Wait a second. Would you like to relate before we take it, all right?
Yes, I think. Well, we've had a nice time tonight, haven't we? Fine. That's, Mr. Edison enjoyed it, looking fine. Yes, indeed. And I'm surprised at the great development of radio. So am I. It's what we've seen here, and we also can be thankful and appreciate the development Mr. Edison's made in the clear tone and helping music, better quality of music in the radio that he's manufacturing. So the whole thing is a great industry. Do you think this great development, we can have further development, the opportunities for young men? No limit today as there were a few years ago? I think so. Yes, indeed. If a young man makes up his mind to work, there's no limit to what he can do. If he makes up his mind to go at it without the idea of work, he hasn't much chance. He must study and work, and he must go back in any art as far as he can, just dig up the very beginning, and he must, the more he goes back, the further he will be able to see ahead. Well, do you think Mr. Edison feels, how does he feel about the chances for young men today? Well, I'll ask him. He's right here. Answer that question now. Now?
Yes. There's more of it than there ever was. There's no end to the inventions and discoveries to go on forever. There's more chance for a young man today than there ever was, where all the large industries are terribly short of high-grade men. They can get almost any seller they want. There's such an awful shortage. The law of supply and demand is on one side.
I think that's right. Yes. I think he's dead right about it. We can just get better men, we can make better developments, and as you said, that they will just get down and work. Yes. And study. And as Mr. Edison has said a good many times, there's no extremity a man won't go to avoid the real labor of thinking. And if we could get that out of their system, why, we'd have greater, or in other words, get them in the habit of working. Yeah, that's right.
And now Edison offering a scholarship on the basis of an exam that he set up himself early in 1929 at the age of 82. And here he describes the background to his offer of a scholarship, which was given to a particularly brilliant young man who went on to great things in armed forces during World War II. Back to 1929 and Thomas Edison.
I am very much gratified to learn that the governors of the states have expressed their willingness to select a boy from each state to compete for the scholarship which I'm offering again this year. On July 29th, I will bring these boys to my laboratory at West Orange, New Jersey, and give them an examination to determine the national winner. I will pay this expense for 4 years at any recognized technical school in the United States which he may select. I wish all boys who want to enter this contest would submit their applications at once to their state boards of education through their school principals. Science is still in its infancy. Its future progress in the United States will be determined by the school boards of today. I want to get them all interested in scientific study and research. This is the purpose of my scholarship offer.
And now Edison cracks a slightly off-colour joke. This is something apparently he was known for.
Here's a pretty good story. A colored man and his wife. The wife says to the colored man, "Sambo, you don't love me anymore." He says, "Yes, I do, honey, but I'm taking a vacation."
And now, an interesting item visually, and I hope people will be tuning in to the our YouTube live stream. If you look up VK3AML, 28 August 2021, you should find it if you're listening on 147.475. This is an October 1929 film of the celebration of the Golden Jubilee of Electric Light, 1879-1929. At that time, Henry Ford had set up a Museum of Americana at Dearborn in Michigan, and had actually scoured the site of Edison's original Menlo Park laboratory to rebuild it stone by stone at his museum at Dearborn. And there, with the original equipment used in 1879 to power up the first carbon filament lamp, Edison actually used the equipment with his sole surviving assistant from that inventive period, Francis Jale, to show how that first electric light had been set up. And his audience was Henry Ford and the President of the United States, who then was Herbert Hoover. This is what you'll see, and this is the arrival at the station at Dearborn. The faults on the original soundtrack. This is Edison with his family arriving at the Dearborn station. Newsreel cameramen all over the place. They were broadcasting this nationwide as well. It's a pity that the broadcast commentary doesn't survive. Windy day. There's a lot of wind noise on the microphone. I suspect this film is actually an outtake. It comes directly from the Movietone archives. There's Mr. Edison and President Herbert Hoover. Mrs. Edison. Henry Ford and his wife. Take a look at those cameras. What price for those? And Edison wearing a very jaunty bowler hat. And off they go to the old laboratory, led along there by Henry Ford. Legendary characters from the history of American manufacturing. MGM newsreel on the right there. This is VK3AML. Mr. Edison seems a bit bewildered as to where to go. Now here he is with Francis Jail on the left and President Hoover at the back, Henry Ford. And Edison's looking at Francis Jail, who's operating, as you'll see in a minute, a thing called a Sprangle Pump. These were filled with mercury that flowed through a kind of a Y tube to evacuate the air from the interior of the carbon filament bulb, which you can actually see glowing at the moment. It's one of the original bulbs from 1879, still in 1929 working. Jail is pouring mercury through the reservoir, and Edison just pointed out that they had at one stage 3,000 of those Sprangle pumps working, producing electric light bulbs at the end of the 1870s.
I'll give you more current.
Francis Jail offering to put more current through the lamp. You can see it glowing quite brightly. It'd be producing about the same amount of light as a modern torch bulb. Not that much, but in 1879 this was incredible. Edison showing how the Sprangle pump traps the air out of the bulb and forces it out of the system.
I'll give some more current.
More current? Lamp gets brighter. This is DC, of course. Tesla hadn't at this stage come along and produced AC.
I'll go too far. You got a bad light there, your eye just wear it out. I've measured that out already.
Henry Ford looks quite fascinated to see the reenactment of the lighting of the first electric lamp, the first commercial electric lamp.
Used to have trouble with flaws in that, there'd be a little white spot, one on the road. Yes, I think it's all right. And fluctuate off and going out. And just a little is coming from the heat. Yes, sir. It's ready to seal off. The end is already. His Excellency.
Edison's examining the filament. I don't think he can quite believe that one of his original bulbs is still operating.
For all practical purposes, that's enough. And see it all. Yes, we'll see it all. We call the glass door, and now His Excellency. No, we'll take a seat. We'll seal it off afterwards, sir. I don't think we'll have it. No,
Edison at this stage was about 82 years old. President Hoover had been elected at the end of the previous year, 1928, replaced Calvin Coolidge as American president. Rather a Pyrrhic victory because he oversaw the onset of the Great Depression. Edison there sitting, watching the electric light to see how long it would burn after all those years. This film, I should mention, is from the Moving Image Resource Collection of the University of South Carolina, which has taken all of the Movietone reels from the first 5 or 10 years of their production of sound films in the 20s and has digitised the lot. They're all on the internet for everybody to see. Francis Jail with a jar of mercury, pouring more mercury into the Sprangle pump. Picture's not too bad on this one, but the sound's pretty awful. There's another copy of this that I'll be about to play that has good sound, but bloody awful picture. I haven't yet synchronised the two.
We had 2,000 of those running once. Matter of fact,
Edison just pointing out that he had 3,000 of these running at one stage, producing the first light bulbs for the New York lighting system.
They got a pump, a real pump. But that wouldn't catch far enough, so they put some phosphorus in it.
They used phosphorus getters in those very early light bulbs. And at the back you can see the storage batteries they're using for the DC supply for the test. Jael has just added a few cells.
Those little valves are very fine little thing.
Flickering at the top of this scene are the original gas lights from the building.
Traps the air here. You can't get fire.
The filament is uniform.
We got more complicated ones over there for scientific purposes, but this was made practical.
Edison talking.
Now, I'll give some more current.
And it's 11 o'clock. In about 5 minutes' time, I'll open up for a live discussion on 147.475. This is VK3AML testing, a film of Edison reenacting the lighting of the first electric lamp on the 50th anniversary, October 1929.
Yes, sir. It's ready to seal off. The end is already. His Excellency come in.
Oh, Francis Pete?
Yes, that's about all. We don't want to seal it off. No.
President Hoover seems a bit overwhelmed.
That's enough.
Yes.
Seal it all.
Yes, we'll seal it off. We'll call the glass blower, and now His Excellency. No.
Francis Jael on the left, President Herbert Hoover at the back, Thomas Edison on the right seated. And we'll stop that there. Light's golden anniversary, 1879-1929. And we're back live. Okay, we have quite a few people who've joined the live stream. NPI Test, Dan, DTM. Where did Edison keep his elephants? Edison's elephants? I think you must be listening to a few too many Tesla stories. Mercury poisoning was obviously not regarded as a problem. I think the number of chemicals that those early experimenters were subjected to, John Young explains the early demise of quite a few of them. NPI Test. Does anyone remember Kev Goldsby doing a voice announcement over the Oz newsreels? I do. I think the Movietone reel towards the end of its production, 1960s, 70s, Kevin Goldsby used to do that. Before that, it was Jack Davey before 1960, and before that again, Jack Lumsdaine in the early 1930s for the Australian reels. There were two reels, basically. The American Fox Movietone reel worked out of a base at Missenden Road in Camperdown, a suburb of Sydney. And the Cinesound reel, the locally owned reel owned by Union Theatres, operated out of a former skating rink in Bondi Junction, which later became, I think, a Norman Ross discount store. Don't know whether it still stands. Similar to nowadays, where project managers put their own aspirations ahead of responsibilities. Thanks for that NPI test. Okay, well, I'm not sure whether I've wired in for 2 meters to be patched through the stream. I'll do that now. Hang on. I think we're wired in. And I've got my pen and paper. So this is now VK3AML calling CQ on 147.475. And is anybody listening, standing by for any calls?
For VK3ACZ.
And VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
We've got VK3ACZ and VK3CG. Have we got any other callers? VK3AML. Okay, that being the case, hope you've had a good week, Peter, although it's been another week of lockdown. Not all bad. It's given me a chance to do a bit of hunting on the internet for material, as you've probably seen. And, of course, ample time for home construction. Next week I'm going to film a little of the equipment that we've got here for mixing and mic equalisation, and I'll be talking a little bit about that. Talking also about extended bandwidth sideband. Just hang on a sec. I'm getting this into order. And Dave, nice to hear you there. Yet again, you've become so regular, you two. It's you make me feel like it's really worthwhile doing this. VK3 Alpha Foxtrot, VK NPI test has no antenna. That's a pity. If you're within 50 kilometres of us here in Burwood East in Melbourne, you should be able to get us then. I'm not sure where you are, 3AF. This is replying, of course, to text messages that are coming through on the YouTube live stream. I see there are, how many? 20 concurrent viewers at the moment, which is good. And there's been a total of 73 people through in the course of the last 90 minutes or so. Just checking the constancy of the stream. And we've lost only 0.7% of frames. 394 frames in about 3/4 of an hour. So the stream, compared to last week where it was collapsing, is actually working quite well. So first, over to you, Peter, VK3ACZ, VK3AML in group.
Yeah, VK3AML in the group from VK3ACZ. Good evening, Chris. Good evening, Dave. Good evening, other listeners. I'm portable on a handheld again. Of course, I know the curfew's on, so I'm not breaking the curfew. I just happen to be transmitting on a portable. Truly, Your Honour, would I lie to you? No. And it's just started to rain here in suburban Boronia. But anyway, I'll just quickly say no green highlighter in my logbook since the lockup first started. Just DX has been escaping me. Need to go out portable to get away from the noise, but I did hear some Russians on 40 metres the last couple of nights in the early hours, but they weren't able to hear me. But anyway, to get on to the subject of your broadcast, oh man, I love the film footage and the sound of Edison, Hoover. Started with quite interesting, the little demonstration about the microphone and the frequencies involved. All really good stuff, but you really saved the best for last. Thoroughly enjoyed the look down history lane at the light bulb and all that. Just thanks so much for it. Really good historical stuff to get into. Anyway, back over to you, Chris. VK3AML in the group. VK3ACZ.
Just left a bit of a pause there, yeah. Edison's one of those people don't realise actually was filmed a lot. And if you know where to look for the footage, there is quite a bit to be found, as I think I've shown. He was a bit of a puckish old character, quite capable of cracking what we would now call dad jokes. Jokes with very feeble punchlines, as you could probably tell, and some of them would not go down well at all these days, like that joke about Sambo. Oh no. He was involved not only with light bulbs and the phonograph industry, which he basically started. He also was involved mostly through the people he employed, William Kennedy, Laurie Dixon and others, in setting up motion pictures as a commercial possibility. He took the the Lumiere idea, or at least he originated the 35mm film gauge, which 2 years later the Lumiere brothers in France invented a projector for. And somehow the Lumieres get all the credit and Edison gets shoveled to one side. Same thing has happened with the Tesla people, who always talk about Edison failing because he chose DC power. Well, I retort, Edison didn't just invent the practical carbon filament bulb, he also manufactured it. He manufactured the whole distribution system. He invented the generators for it. He worked out how to route the power supply through, through ducts and onto poles, and the switches, the house fittings, the whole system was due to him. And to criticise him on the basis of one aspect, that is that he voted initially for DC power rather than AC, seems to me to be rather missing the point. He also was, by the end of his life, a bit of a bloated capitalist. He had huge labour problems, as one might expect from somebody who'd made so much money. There's a saying, all power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, he was a mixture. He was a shades of grey in that respect. But certainly his greatest invention, I think, was the research laboratory itself. The idea of getting a number of talented people together, not only to think up new devices which would be useful, but to actually reduce them to a manufacturable basis and to sell them. I have in this house 2 Edison cylinder machines, 2 Edison disc machines, and a Columbia cylinder machine, all indirectly the result of work done by Edison in the 1880s and 1890s. So a lot of his material, a lot of his manufactured product still survives around the world. Can Tesla say as much? VK3CG and the group with a pause, VK3AML.
VK3AML group, VK3ECG. I didn't hear anybody, but I shall keep leaving breaks and things like that. Yeah, fascinating tonight. I really enjoyed it, and particularly right at the beginning, I really liked the Microphone University material and about speech and voice, and it's really interesting, sort of listening to that and thinking about it in relation to, the other things I do with singing, and well, we spent a great deal of time concentrating on. Interestingly, concentrating on vowels. You might think would be clearly articulating to get the words out, and that's certainly true. But the point, I think, from the musical point of view, is that the energy actually lies in the vowel, and therefore getting the vowel right from a musical sense gives you the power and the energy of the singing, and that's really fascinating to think about that concept of intelligibility and where does the energy in a singing voice come from, and that it's coming from the vowel sounds rather than the fricatives and so on. So whilst you certainly need those to make the words that you're singing intelligible, the energy of the singing itself and the quality comes from the vowel, which I thought was fascinating, because it gives you a sort of scientific basis for what is often a lot of, like experiential arts-based teaching. And in reality, is even if you go to one of my choir practices, we probably would be spending 20% of the time just focusing on vowel sounds, and it's extraordinary the difference that makes. It's fascinating. Yeah, so I must say I quite enjoyed that, and I'll certainly be using some of that. And the point about the power is fascinating, and the white noise, I really, yes, and the fact that really at the end of the day, power levels are not a significant a feature to intelligibility at the end of the day. I must say I've spent a bit of time trying to put a new element in my desk mic actually. So I've got can switch between dynamic and condenser, and I think that's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. Still got a bit more work to do on it actually. It's not entirely sort of balanced properly yet, but I'll have a go at that. And I must say, one of the other things I've found really useful in this sort of COVID era of doing a lot of my work online in Zoom sessions and things like that, is that I actually have a Rode NT1 microphone, and I actually have that set up on a arm with all the insulation and so on. And it really is quite interesting how a lot of people are using just headsets with tiny little mics and quite a tinny sort of sound. And I know that mine comes across extremely as a rich sound, and I find that's actually quite useful in exerting your influence on meetings. Anyway, back to you, Chris. VK3AML and the group VK3 Echo Charlie Golf.
VK3CG and group VK3AML. Just checking my stream again, making sure that it's all going on okay. Now, yes, the business of microphones is a lot more complicated than at first meets the eye. I mean, many people think that you get a microphone, you look at its frequency response and then apply equalization. If it's flat, you don't apply any equalization to it, forgetting that placement and the source, the voice, frequently is not flat and can be helped, at least in terms of intelligibility on a recording, by equalization. My voice, for example, I put it through a waterfall display. I'll actually do this live next week. I can run a waterfall display of the audio that I'm putting out on the screen as I speak. And in it you can see that I have quite a bit of voice amplitude between 50 Hertz and about 500 Hertz. And then there's a dip. There's a dip around 1K, comes back up at about 2 kilohertz, and then of course there are the fricatives and consonants above that producing a bit of amplitude there. But there is this significant hole in the middle of my response, of my actual voice, not of the microphone. And if you put that over an RF link with a lot of background noise, you miss the middle of the response and it sounds very strange. So I actually can equalize with my mixer. There's a mid-range tunable parametric equalizer. I can vary it from about 100 Hertz up to about 4K. And I can cut or boost to varying degrees at whatever frequency I choose with the turn of a pot. So mostly I choose to boost the mid-range around 1K. Not by a great deal, it's only about somewhere between 3 and 5 dB, but it's enough to get the whole spectrum of my voice above a white noise background. And while band noise, as I pointed out from that recording of 80 meters, is not true white noise, it's white noise with a lot of flicker behind it, going up and down in level, which masks a lot of whatever change in overall power you would put there. So the message I'm trying to get through there is that all of these, I think, hysterical moves to push 1 kilowatt permit for amateurs above 400 watts, as if the whole future of ham radio depends on it, is bunkum. It's not technically supportable. You will find it difficult on any HF circuit with noise behind it to detect a 4 dB difference between 400 watts and 1000 watts, because your 400 watts will be going up and down as a signal, and the noise level will be flickering up and down with static crashes, and between the two of them you cannot differentiate a 4 dB change. I defy anybody to tell me that it's significant. in those circumstances. And I'll demonstrate it. I'll demonstrate it by varying an audio signal 4 dB against a flickering noise background next week when I have a chance to mix it all up and do the right things with levels. It's an interesting one because, you know, CBers, I think, don't really have an impression, or people who come into the hobby without the technical background don't really know how the watts, the number of watts they're pumping in, relates to decibels, and the fact that the perception of change of power is logarithmic, not linear. So hence the comment by Nigel Holmes, 3DZ, whose judgment I respect absolutely, that to make any significant difference to an HF transmission and receiving circuit, you have to multiply the power not by 2.5, like 400 to 1,000, but by a factor of 10 for any significant change. VK3ACZ and the group VK3AML, with a pause for anybody else who'd like to break in and perhaps abuse me for that comment.
Yeah, VK3AML and the group from VK3ACZ. Nothing heard. And yeah, you triggered a few things there, Chris, but I'll start with a bit of housekeeping. Jim 3AMN pretty much conceded on our 80-metre net this morning that the next club meeting is not very likely to go ahead, that it'll be on air on the RHA repeater, just to give you a bit of a heads up. No surprise there, I suppose.
That's a bit sad.
It seems very unlikely that restrictions will be lifted. I would like to think they would, but there certainly isn't any evidence for it. And as soon as you mentioned CB and power, I cringed because I had an unfortunate discussion with a fellow in Baronia during the week who was bragging about being able to run a kilowatt. And whilst it may be more talk and hot air than fact, he was telling me he was very upset that he saw an ACMA van drive along the street there while he was out walking the dog. So who knows? But yeah, I derive a lot of satisfaction running DX barefoot and speaking to these people that are running their kilowatt or 1500 and all that, and I'm being heard fine by them with my lousy 100. So mind you, I still get killed in the pile-ups. But on the subject of microphones and all that, another cringe-worthy thing for me, because I can count on quite a few hands the number of conversations I've listened into where a fellow amateur has been convinced that his audio is kaput and is being told, you know, compression on, compression off, processor on, off, more treble, less treble, more boost gain. And I'm thinking all along, oh, the poor guy, his audio sounds perfect. So, you know, I concede that a lot of it is in the ear of the beholder, but yeah, I know the punchier stuff gets through the DX and the choppy noise better, but anyway, it's certainly an interesting subject, and again, I'll thank you for bringing it up. And yeah, I too like the video presentation of the microphone school. VK3AML in the group, VK3ACZ.
I pause for an interruption and one never comes. Yeah, it's surprising how much people don't worry too much about audio. I take the attitude that if I've paid frequently $1,000 for an ham radio rig, that I want to have something better than a 1950 vintage telephone audio coming out of it. And for example, there was one particular amateur, I visited his shack with another ham. I won't say which country he was in, wasn't Australia. He had a Flex radio, very impressive, 30-inch flat screen that he was operating the Flex radio on, good microphone. He had an antenna and a site where he had 10 acres to play with. He wasn't married, so he had the full freedom to use whatever income he had entirely on amateur radio, or very nearly entirely on amateur radio. Yet, he was listening to that radio of that quality, which probably set him back $10,000 or more for that and the linear, probably more like $15,000. He was listening on a 2-inch speaker that he probably bought from a $2 shop. I'm not kidding. It was tin. It sounded like my friend, the late Jeff Courts, used to describe that sort of speaker as sounding like an S.G. Brown headphone from 1925, amplified by being put in a piss pot. And that about summed up the quality. I mean, the quality out of that radio could have been full hi-fi, and he was listening through it on a 2-inch loudspeaker, and a bad one, with distortion and frequency response lumps all over. Sometimes I'm left absolutely in awe